Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. World Water Day is here, and with that comes big concerns for water in BC. Parts of our province were in drought throughout the entire winter. The snowpack is down, and forecasters expect another hot summer. What is your relationship to fresh water, and what needs to be done, do you think, to safeguard it? And after the break, traveling with pets. We have another edition of our Pets column and tips for you, and we'd love to hear your tips. I'm Dan Burrett, in for Michelle Elliott. Welcome to a Friday edition of BC Today. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, as well as on cbc.ca/BC and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. As I mentioned, today is World Water Day. The United Nations says the theme for this year, and there is usually a theme, is water for peace. It says when we cooperate on water, we create a positive ripple effect, fostering harmony, generating prosperity, and building resilience to shared challenges. We must act upon the realization that water is not only a resource to be used and competed over, it is a basic human right, intrinsic to every aspect of life. Here in BC, concerns about water are abundant, from droughts to floods, low snowpack, to the impact of wildfires. The BC government has pledged tens of millions of dollars in new funding to deal with climate emergencies and a new flood plan. But what does access to fresh water mean to you? What is the situation where you live? And what can we do to better preserve our water supplies and be prepared for more weather extremes caused by climate change? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 is our number across Metro Vancouver. Pound 690 on your cell phone. Please be pulled over or hands-free. You can email us as well, bctoday@cbc.ca. We're joined by two guests this afternoon. Kat Hartwig is the Executive Director of Living Lakes Canada. It's an NGO based in Nelson that works with Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to protect freshwater. And Dave Zender is a rancher in the Kootenays. Kat and Dave, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Dan.
Kat,
Dan.
You're welcome. Kat, I want to start with you. What do you think of what the BC government's new flood plan and funding for climate emergencies that we heard recently? $39 million for 50 new projects in municipalities and First Nations.
Well, I think that is a good first step, and they've also announced last year $100 million watershed security fund, which is going to be distributed over the next 20 years using the interest as the distribution amount. And the province is also busy building a watershed water security strategy plan. The problem is that it isn't enough. These problems have now compounded, and so we're in these reactionary cycles of having to deal with drought, flood, fire, repeat, and we're not setting aside enough money to do the planning that we were supposed to have been doing 30 years ago, which has put us into this repetitive reactionary cycle to begin with. So I feel like while it's a good start, it's not nearly going to be enough, sadly.
We should note this is on top of about $200 million that was already pledged by the province that involved funding about 2,000 projects. Dave, what do you think of the most recent funding announcements?
Yeah, I echo what Kat has said, and it's an honor to be on the call with Kat today. She's a real giant in this field. So yeah, I agree. It sounds like a lot of money, but when you put it in the context of the billions of dollars, for example, of the last flood event that we had in BC, it really isn't enough, unfortunately, and we need to just really focus on ramping up our game, because we know that ultimately anything that we invest in these kinds of programs and these kinds of defenses will result in huge savings to the public in the future, and that means more money for other priorities. So yeah, I think it's a really key message that we need to think about, is that we have these great plans. There have been some really progressive moves made. For instance, working more with First Nations in the development of the plan. We heard from Tyrone McNeil, the chief, Stalo chief. He was actively involved in the development of the flood strategy, and he commented about sharing the pen, and that's in the actual development of this plan. So I think there's been a sea change in the approach. I just hope that we can see our way through to to funding. That's the first thing. And the second thing is kind of, I think Kat will agree with me on this, that we need a more coordinated approach too. Just bringing all the different players together out of their silos into a common sandbox where we can really be effective, because it's going to take all the resources we have, and it's going to take full collaboration to make this happen.
We touched on it a little bit. Let's go back to 2021, the atmospheric river, and this is after the horrific and deadly heat dome. The scales of these disasters. The 2021 atmospheric river cost governments billions, federally, provincially. We saw what it did to livestock. It wiped it out, destroyed homes and livelihoods. It snapped the Coquihalla Highway essentially in half, destroyed parts of Highway 8. And estimates are that it cost insurance companies almost $700 million. Given that, how much of a difference, when we talk about the scale of the problem, and Kat, I'll go back to you on this, how much do we need to spend? Can you put a dollar figure on it?
Okay, well, I can put a dollar figure on what we estimated for the Columbia Basin. So back in 2006, the Pacific Climate Change Consortium gave us information about the data gaps that were missing in the Columbia Basin to allow for communities to have better adaptation options. So we did a GIS analysis on those data gaps, and we consulted with hydrologists, both at the federal and provincial level, along with consultants. And what we found was, and we've started to do the monitoring to fill those missing data gaps, installing hydrometric stations. But what we found is that, first of all, a hydrologist will tell you you need 10 years of data to make important decisions around allocation. But secondly, we just for the Columbia Basin alone is $60 million over 10 years, and that's just to get baseline data for modeling. It's not actually real-time data, and so you can.
And sorry, it's just for data? It's not for mitigation?
Just to collect data. So just to collect data and using modeling techniques. It's not actually all even real-time data, just to understand what we need to, the information that we need to gather to build water budgets. And so that's only the Columbia Basin. So you can imagine what it's going to be like across the province, and actually across Canada for that matter. I mean, the World Wildlife Foundation did a study 5 years ago, and they weren't able to complete the freshwater assessment because we didn't have enough data. And particularly groundwater, as we start moving from surface water to groundwater, we're really challenged with understanding our aquifer size and their recharge rate, and particularly in BC. So yes, we have to spend a lot more money. So I've heard numbers like 2 billion being thrown around, but the problem is that it's getting exacerbated. So we're in these cycles of having to react to, as you pointed out, huge environmental disasters because of climate.
Let's go to Maria, who's joining us from Valemont. Maria, thanks for joining us. What's your situation with water? Hello, Maria, are you there? Don't think we have Maria at the moment. We have Mike who called us, and hopefully he can get back on the line. Bit of cell service problem. He said he wanted to pass along his thought that clear-cutting ancient watershed rainforest, eliminating rain and causing drought, a big concern there, and we know we've heard that before from a number of people. Dave Zender, I want to go back to you. As a rancher, what has your water situation been in the past few years?
So, like many ranchers, or most ranchers in the province, we're wholly dependent on the snow melt. And as I understand the climate science, they're calling for, we're realizing what was predicted, and that is we're getting more of our precipitation falling during the winter in the form of rain, and it's not really sticking the way that snow does, and holding over it with a nice slow release in the spring, because we're losing it earlier in the spring too. So that's a real problem, because again, a lot of our irrigation systems are dependent on the snowmelt water to irrigate with, and the province has just recently announced a new program to support water infrastructure on farms, and I think that's good. I think in the case of cattle, there's 900 of the 1,500 dams that are on farms in BC are on cattle ranches. So holding back that water and then releasing it at the appropriate time is really going to be important now and into the future. So if we don't have the water, we just don't have the crops and the food that we're going to require from that water supply. But but if we, this new program is focused on improving that infrastructure. But I just hope that we can see our way through, because I don't think when we spend money, we can just focus on the agronomic part anymore. We have to really think about these additional benefits, like when that water flows off the mountains. Sometimes our creeks are getting so hot in the summer now because the flows are restricted and the hotter temperatures, it's threatening fish populations.
Right.
So again, farm dams can play a role in helping to, if we release that water during critical points, and we can really save fish populations. If we, once again, if we work collaboratively together and avoid some of the conflicts that we started to see last year, when some of these things came to a head.
Let's go to our callers now. They've been patient. Maria's back on the line from Valemont. Maria, thanks for joining us. What's your water situation?
Well, my water situation is not very good. I'm a very small-scale farmer in Valemont, which is mostly sand. It's not a typical farm area, but I farmed for 24 years. A little bit of everything, large vegetable garden, which we mainly water by rainwater, collected rainwater or snow melt or whatever. Our well is in not a very good shape since the pipeline construction went through against my will. But my comment actually was not specifically about myself. It was when I listened over the years about anything having to do with water and the problem with enough water, I noticed that it's often the farmers first that are told you can't do this anymore, you can't do that anymore. I remember almond farmers in California and other things as well. But you hardly hear about golf courses or swimming pools or any luxury thing that is nice to have but not necessary, while farmers, every farmer, grows food in one way or another.
Maria, I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. Before we get to that, we'll kind of do it as a package here. Bob is joining us from Port Coquitlam. Bob, what's your situation with water?
Well, I'm trying to save water, and I think everyone we can do our bit to save water. Just a few quick suggestions. For instance, instead of washing the driveway with a hose, sweeping it. Much quicker, much easier, and doesn't use any water. Instead of washing your car with a hose, wait for it to rain. Use the rainwater to wash your car. And peeing in men, just pee in a tub. You don't have to flush, only once a day, maybe. And you know the saying, when it's yellow, let it mellow. When it's brown, flush it down. Women, let it mellow. 2 or 3 peas, and then you can flush it possibly. But all those few things. And when you wash your vegetables and stuff in the sink, use a tub so the water pours and you can save it. Use that water for watering your plants. There's so many things we can do as individuals to limit our water use and therefore have a lot more water in the hot summers when we need it.
Bob, I appreciate the call. Maria, I want to ask you, first of all, what do you make of the suggestion? Some different ideas there, right? We've got a small-scale farmer who's upset about swimming pools and golf courses, and then Bob with his practical bathroom tips. Yeah. Go ahead, Kat.
Oh, I was just going to say, I do let it mellow, so that's good. So that's a good tip, and I agree with that one. But just to say, I think one of the things that we really need to look at and we haven't been addressing is the harmonization of the various ministries. So we get inundated with calls of people who are very concerned about the clear cutting happening in their watersheds, which are already fragile, and the soil is drying, and there's all sorts of problems with small local watersheds. So the harmonizing of various ministries and using water as the common denominator, I think, is essential. And our land use practices are not aligned with our understanding of the need to switch paradigms and move into the 21st century to address the climate crisis. So we're still having old policies in place with old AACs annual allowable cuts that really are doing a disservice to our watershed security thinking. So that would be something that I would absolutely recommend, because right now we have very much multi-jurisdictional gridlocks, and we don't really have the vertical integration that's needed from the federal government to the province to local government and First Nations governments at the local level, where the impact of water shortages are felt. They're felt at the local level. So these regional tables would be essential to start addressing the problems at the local scale and leveraging all of the expertise at the local level.
And Dave, I have to ask, what kind of difference? You're a rancher. You use probably, depending on with the beef cattle, et cetera, more water than somebody would maybe be doing as a smaller scale farmer. What kinds of differences can those individual actions, do you think, make? Whether it's Bob or whether it's Maria saying, "Don't fill up a swimming pool."
Yeah, I think what's really interesting. I spoke at a conference a few years ago in Salt Lake City of all the watershed managers from the Western United States. And, I mean, this is all new to us here in BC, this water shortage. It's fascinating to look at their maps, and they show, what areas have in North America water and which don't. And then basically, if you look at in the Western states, the 49th parallel is about the line where they kind of make the distinction between there's enough water and there's not. And north of that line, they suggest we have enough water. But even with all this huge amount of snowfall and all these amount of rainfalls in California, they're not filling their reservoirs. And so yet they're still expanding their cities. And where are they getting the water from? They're buying farms. They're turning off the irrigation on the farms and saying, we're not going to grow food there. We're using this water to flush toilets in the city. So there is a direct correlation. And, sometimes those amounts can be not as much as is needed, in these water conservation actions. But I do think that that's helpful, because it puts the issue in people's mind, in the presence of mind about this, and for us to be cognizant of it. Even if it doesn't make a massive difference, it's still going to make some difference, and it helps us be cognizant of our impacts and the trade-offs that we make when we use water. So do we want to use water for recreation, or do we need it for food supply and for wildlife and for other biodiversity needs? These are the kinds of considerations. And again, this is relatively new to us, but it's not in the States. And they're looking to us. I think there will come a time when they're looking to us for water, because they are completely out. Their aquifers are not being replenished. The big reservoirs that they have, I heard one scientist say, I'm a scientist, I shouldn't speak in absolutes, he said, but these reservoirs, these big reservoirs, will never be full again. And that was a stunning statement from someone who usually speaks in a more conservative manner. So again, I think it's a critical issue.
Bill is joining us on the line from Vancouver. Bill, what is your relationship with water?
Well, I live in Vancouver, and I have to admit that I could probably save water in my everyday happenings. I try and take quick showers, and I do some recycling of water. But I guess my number one question would be, we have a number of reservoirs that service our area here.
Yes.
Has anybody ever done a study on our population and businesses and everything added together, and what is the limit?
Interesting question, Bill. I appreciate the call. I want to put that to Kat, but I note as I look at the Metro Vancouver reservoir levels and water use right now, we are within the normal range, but it's lower than it normally is. And some of the footage that we were showing certainly showed lower snowpacks on the local mountains, et cetera. Kat, what about the capacity that we have, let's say Metro Vancouver now with the 3 reservoirs that generally service our area? What's going to happen in the future?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. And we've been asking that question for 30 years, and then now the future is here, and it's only going to get worse. So we're living the predicted models of climate change impacting us at the local level. And so 63% of the population of BC residents live in water-stressed areas throughout this province. So we're all going to be in the same conundrum of trying to understand what water do we have, what water do we need, and how is that water then going to be allocated? And as Dave said, not to the ecosystems that support us, but also we're going to have to make civil society choices. Are we going to be able to make snow for a ski hill? Do we water a golf course? Do we have enough water for our communities? And so it really is urgent, and then we have to address it now. And while the province is planning a provincial strategic plan for watershed security, that's all well and good, and that's progressive, and that's necessary. But the problems are here now, and they need to be resolved at local regional tables now, and we need to be sharing best practices with each other across the province. So the reservoir, I can't answer the Vancouver reservoir question, but yeah.
Yeah. And this has been floated by our colleagues who had a great guest on the coast with Gloria Makarenko. Is it time for water metering in Metro Vancouver, perhaps, and throughout BC? Bob, I'll start with you on that one. Bob's gone. Sorry, Dave. My apologies. I was looking at the calls. There we are. Dave, what do you think of water metering?
So my limited understanding of the water supply for Vancouver is it's reasonably good comparative to other parts of the province. And I mean, that's not surprising given, the high rainfall area that Vancouver is in. But a bigger issue is the flooding issue, I think, in the Lower Fraser. And so one of the groups that I work with is the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition, who work with the Emergency Planning Secretariat, and they've been doing a lot of work to look at the issue of flooding in the Lower Mainland and the threat of flooding and the infrastructure. And so much of the infrastructure focus has been on gray infrastructure, on pumping and diking, and yet what's really needed is to reconnect some of these disconnected waterways that can act and ebb and flow the way that they historically did, because of course a lot of the Lower Mainland was once a large floodplain, and as we settled it over time, the settlers drained it and put in the diking. But the model shows that those dikes cannot hold that water back. So as we saw in the flood that happened, we're not prepared, and the scientists are telling us that was it's not a question of if that happens again, something like that, and of that magnitude, but when. So we really need to focus in the Lower Mainland on, conserving water, absolutely, but also looking at the larger question around flood management. Where does the water go? And that's and there's a large role again for farms potentially to play in that, because where is the water going to go? It has to go onto farmland. So we have to help to prepare farmland to receive that water when the flood happens, so that we don't completely destroy farms, that we don't flush so much topsoil out to the ocean and contaminated water, but we have farms that are ready to absorb that water as much as it can and not create massively impactful disturbances in the way that it's set up right now. So that's a lot of work that I believe needs to be done to try and prevent that.
And last word to you, Kat. Is it time for water metering, perhaps on the South Coast and beyond?
Well, I definitely think that we need to do water metering, and that's just one of the solutions. We also need to have industry pay for its fair share in terms of the amount of water being used there. But I think what we really want to do is move out of these reactionary cycles into adaptive management cycles. So that requires planning and data collection, and then more importantly, that data gets analyzed and gets to decision making, and that's where we have the perennial bottleneck. So yes, I think we need to get out of the reactionary cycle if we can, and that's going to be expensive.
We appreciate both your time and your expertise, both of you. Dave Zender, a rancher in the Kootenays, Kat Hartwig, Executive Director of Living Lakes Canada. Thank you for joining us on World Water Day.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
It is 1:29, almost 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today. March Madness is underway in the U.S. It's a single elimination tournament where 68 college basketball teams in the NCAA compete in 7 rounds for the national championship. Surrey, BC's Deja Lee plays for the University of California, Irvine. She told CBC's Stephen Quinn what it's like to play in one of the sport's most anticipated tournaments.
Oh, it's so exciting. It's my first time going to the tournament, and our school hasn't been in over 25 years. So I'm just excited to see what it's about and make some more history. So
I want to play a clip from just a few days ago when your matchup was announced. It was UCI against Gonzaga.
And they'll be playing a team making their first tournament appearance since 1995, number 13, UC Irvine. There's a reaction. Let's go.
Oh, yeah. I need some Anteater swag, I think.
Okay, so that's the announcement. Anteater swag. That's the announcement that UCI is going to be matched up against Gonzaga, and all the UCI players were jumping around, very excited. What was going through your mind while that was happening?
I was honestly shocked that we got the 13th seed. I mean, that's one of the higher seeds for a team coming from our conference. And so just seeing that we were playing against number 4 Gonzaga, we were all just, at least I was kind of starstruck. I was amazed. So
UCI and Portland both seeded 13th, and you are up against each of you up against 2 teams that are seeded 4th. So how do you feel heading into that game? I mean, it's Saturday, and Gonzaga is a major basketball superpower.
yeah, I mean, it's March Madness, so anything can happen at this point. And one thing our coach talked about today is that it all really just depends on who's firing at the right time. And so hopefully the cards are in our favor, but I'm confident that we can shock some people on Saturday.
We have some developing news to share with you now. An update on the health of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. In a video released earlier today, Kate reveals she's being treated for cancer. Here's some of what she says.
In January, I underwent major abdominal surgery in London, and at the time, it was thought that my condition was non-cancerous. The surgery was successful. However, tests after the operation found cancer had been present. My medical team therefore advised that I should undergo a course of preventative chemotherapy, and I'm now in the early stages of that treatment. This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family. As you can imagine, this has taken time. It has taken me time to recover from major surgery in order to start my treatment. But most importantly, it has taken us time to explain everything to George, Charlotte, and Louis in a way that's appropriate for them and to reassure them that I'm going to be okay.
A message from Catherine, the Princess of Wales today, and you can read much more on this story on our main website, cbcnews.ca. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, as well as on our CBC Vancouver YouTube page and the free CBC News app. Coming up after the news, traveling with pets. If you've done it, you know it comes with some challenges. How do you do it successfully? We'd love to hear your stories, good, bad, and furry. That's after this news update with Karis Hogg.
A U.S. resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza tied to the release of hostages failed to pass at the UN Security Council this morning. Permanent members Russia and China voted against the motion. This draft is the first time the U.S. has supported calls for an immediate ceasefire at the UN. And here at home, the BC and federal governments are providing nearly $100 million to help communities upgrade their drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. The federal minister for Emergency Preparedness, Harjit Sajjan, announced the funding on World Water Day. He says the funding has been allocated to 14 communities across the province. And now taking a look at the BC weather for the North Coast, sunny, high 11. For the Peace, a mix of sun and cloud, high -6, but with a wind chill near -17. For the Central Interior, a mix of sun and cloud, chance of flurries, high +4. For the Boundary and Kootenay regions, a chance of showers later this afternoon, high 11. For the Okanagan and Southern Interior, a chance of showers late this afternoon, high 12. And for Metro Vancouver, Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, 60% chance of showers with a high of 13. Tonight, rain and a low of 8. And now back to Dan Burrett with more of BC Today.
Thank you, Karis Hogg. Happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday to you.
Have to ask a question. When you were growing up, did you grow up with pets?
I did, yeah.
Yes.
When I was a kid, I had a cat, and I was 4 when I got her, and so she was like a member of the family. She was like another sibling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you travel with the cat? No?
No, she was not a travel cat.
Oh, okay.
And whenever she was in the car, she was freaked out and on the dashboard, like slinking down.
Oh,
and
no.
we tried to put her in the little carrier
Yeah.
thing, and she would, like, all legs, just try and keep herself from going in.
Like a Cirque du Soleil acrobat. Oh, no.
She liked to,
Yeah.
she was a homebody.
Yeah, and it's funny watching some pets, and some pets love the ride, whether it's usually dogs, right? Head out the window, snapping at nature. Others, they don't do so well. So I think we're going to hopefully get we will get some good advice from our expert, and hopefully we'll get some calls into that. So it should be a fun segment. Happy Friday, Karis. Thanks.
Happy Friday to you, Dan.
We want to get to some emails now from our last segment about water. Mike writes us, hello, what we have to do is tax residential users. Things like more than 2 bathroom houses should be discouraged or taxed extra, perhaps water metering. New houses could easily be built with gray water recovery, solar panel roofs, and rain usage. None of this is done. Renovation should have to file a waste plan outlining all materials being recycled, not hauled to a dump in a bin truck, further contaminating our water. Robert and Jan tell us the city we live in, Abbotsford, has all homes on water meters. Some cities don't do that. Also, there should be a ban on watering lawns. And Gail says water is the right of all living things. During the last heat dome, I had a raccoon come up on my deck and go straight for my watering can. We appreciate all the emails and the calls. And it is time for our bi-weekly pet column. It is spring break this week. Many families perhaps are on vacation without their pets, and perhaps with. And we all know how much dogs like routine. Traveling, though, involves lots of new sights, sounds, smells, and experiences. Our pet expert is on to tell us more in a moment. But first, we're asking you, are you traveling with your dog or perhaps another pet? What are your dog training questions? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 is our number in Metro Vancouver, pound 690 on your cell phone. Please be pulled over or hands-free. You can email BC Today at cbc.ca and fire us a text 236-330-2623. And joining us now is Sarah Shapiro-Ward, a professional dog trainer with When Hounds Fly. Sarah, nice to see you.
It's nice to be back. I love talking about dogs. Yeah. Can't wait to get into it.
People love talking about dogs too. So what are your clients telling you about traveling with pets and dogs specifically these days?
Every spring and sometimes even into summer, I always get a story about a disastrous trip, usually camping,
Yep.
Sometimes to the patio somewhere. People are not even going that far and their dogs are really struggling. So people tell me there's car sickness, there's inability to kind of settle in the car, but most of the time it's just a break in the routine.
Yep.
And inability to sleep, and that kind of causes dogs to get either kind of overexcited or a little bit cranky.
It's funny growing up with 2 lovely Airedales at different periods of time. At least one of them we would notice when we were going on a trip and even have the suitcases out, even if we were bringing her or not. Regardless, she got what we called canine suitcase syndrome. She knew something was up.
She knew it was coming.
And she was How do they know that?
Well, dogs are really good at pattern recognition. So it only takes a couple of times. You get your suitcases together and then you leave and they start connecting the dots. And you can even see that every single day when you leave your house. You put your coat on, you get your keys, your dog knows what's up before you put your shoes on and you step out of the door. They're pretty smart. We don't give them enough credit sometimes.
When it comes to the overexcited dogs, first of all, what do you recommend to dog parents?
Well, overexcitement kind of comes in a couple of different flavors. Sometimes it's perfectly normal. Dogs get excited. Maybe they're a little bit jumpy or mouthy, and then they settle down. And for those kinds of dogs, some basic training is really all you kind of need. Taking a class, working on those polite greetings, working on settle, that can really, really help. Now, for other dogs, they do get overexcited to a more extreme level, where maybe they, sometimes they pee themselves, they have submissive urination, sometimes they can't calm down, and so they get really, really hyper, and there's jumping and nipping and mouthing that just lasts for a really, really long time. And for those dogs, we might suggest a lot more behavioral modification type practice, where you work with a trainer for a longer period of time to help teach them how to be calm and settle in those environments. That's more in depth, but for all dogs, they can really benefit from practice and from doing basic obedience training.
I guess there's no timeline on the scale for how long you would need to train a specific dog. Any guidelines for, if you're trying to bring or have to bring the dog on the trip, how much time you want to leave to do that training?
It does depend on the dog, so it really is an individual kind of goal. But I always recommend for everyone to address rehearsal, right? Go pretend you're going out camping, or maybe go camping, but for just a day rather than a 4-day trip. Instead of doing a road trip, maybe just drive further than you normally would to a different part of the city or part of the countryside, just to make sure that your dog is okay with traveling outside of where they normally go, making sure your dog can relax for an hour or two when you're out in the middle of nowhere or something like that. Then that way, if any problems do crop up, you know what you're going to be faced with, and you can start working on those specific problems rather than waiting until you're doing that big camping trip with all of your friends, or you're going to your nephew's birthday party, or you're going to your neighbor's barbecue and you're having that disastrous experience.
It has happened once or twice. Lorna joins us from Cobble Hill. Thanks for calling in, Lorna. What's your experience with travel and dogs? Hello, Lorna.
Yes,
you're on. What's your experience?
My thing to share is about there is a thing that is called a cooling vest, and it's for dogs.
A cooling vest, okay.
And it works like a charm.
Is that right? And do you have dogs?
We have a dog, yes.
Yep. And how often do you put the cooling vest on them?
I put it on them every day when it's too hot.
Oh, okay. And does the cooling vest also work when you travel with them?
Yes, works like a charm.
Really? How long did it take you to figure out that was a good way to go?
We found it at Bosley's.
Bosley's, okay.
Bosley's had it for sale there, and that would have been 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago? 9 years? Yes, probably about 8, 9 years ago we found out about it, and it was like, oh my goodness. And we had our dog in the camper, and she was standing there looking at us with this ice vest on and her harness over top, and she was looking at us, and she wasn't panting a bit, and the temperature in the camper was 100 degrees.
Oh, good Lord. And
she wasn't panting at all.
Really? And was it still considered safe even if you were in a hot vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
We have the dog we have now.
Yeah.
He's in our truck a lot of the time, and he has his cooling vest on, and he actually comes for it. I'm going to be way more comfortable with this on than not.
Lovely, Lorna. Thanks for the call.
Thank you so much for asking about what to have dogs for travel, because it works like a charm.
Okay, good to know.
Anyway, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye. Sarah, what do you think of that? A cooling vest?
I love cooling vests.
Really?
So I have 2 dogs. They're both poodle. Well, one's a poodle, one's a poodle mix. So they're curly-coated dogs. They're quite dark in color. And they get really hot really easily. And the cooling vest, like Lorna says, is such a lifesaver. What you do, and I don't know if she described it, you get them wet and you kind of squeeze out all the extra liquid. And what it evaporates as your dog's wearing it.
Yep.
So they do kind of dry out and get crispy. You've got to keep topping them up with fresh water, but that evaporation can really, really help them cool down. Because I don't know if you guys know, but dogs don't sweat like we do. They pant, and so that evaporation is really cooling. I still would be cautious about leaving your dog in a hot car.
I was going to ask.
There's a limit on these things for sure. Because the cooling vest does dry out, they have a time limit to them. So if you're able to be there and top them up and make sure they're okay and make sure they've got drinking water, it's usually okay, but we can't leave them unsupervised because that water dries away and then they aren't effective anymore.
Particularly in a car, it's just the rule.
Particularly
just do
in a
not
car.
do it.
Yeah, it's just too dangerous a lot of the time. So.
Have you traveled with pets, particularly dogs? What has been your experience? Give us a call now across our province. 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733 is our number in Metro Vancouver. Pound 690 on your cell phone. Be pulled over, please. You can text us 236-330-2623 and fire us an email. bctoday@cbc.ca. And if even it is a dog, we'd love to hear your experiences with other pets, traveling, whether it's a road trip, whether you've had to fly with them. Always very interesting. I want to ask you about this, Sarah, flying with a pet. Most dogs can't be in the cabin. They have to be underground, I guess, depending, or in the cargo hold, depending on size. What are some of the best ways to prepare the animal for that? It can be a bit traumatic.
It can be really stressful. So always kind of assess your dog beforehand. If you have a particularly shy dog or a particularly sensitive to sounds dog, then I really would consider alternate strategies of getting to where you need to be. But if your dog is generally well adjusted and they're not too sensitive to sounds, then it can be absolutely okay to travel with them. Small dogs, so under about 20 pounds or so, can go in the cabin with you. If that's an option, I always recommend it. It is safer and it is more comfortable for the dog to travel with you. That said, it can be tricky. There's pet rest areas in some airports, but not all. So sometimes your dog will need to go to the bathroom and there's nowhere to go. And you have to be really careful about keeping them inside their containers when they're in the plane with you. So you can't just let them out and have them run around.
No.
Sometimes people do that. In terms of going in cargo, number one is crate training. And this goes for cabin as well. But we want to make sure our dog is very comfortable with the carrier or the crate. The crate is appropriate. And your dog has everything that they need in there. So don't just, put them in a small space and hope for the best. Practice that. And I always like to recommend traveling with them in a crate, whether it's in your car, like going back and forth, so that they get kind of used to, I go in the crate, we go somewhere, we travel for a while, and then we come out. And you want to build up so that the time that they're in the crate is roughly equivalent to the time that they're going to be in the plane for.
That pattern of repetition you
exactly,
talked about, the learned behavior. Interesting. And what about when it comes to traveling with that, what are the positive reinforcement methods that you would use, for example, with your dogs?
When traveling, so it depends if I'm going to be right there or if I'm not going to be close
Well, let's
by.
say both.
So both, yeah. It depends on what you're doing. So if I'm right there, I typically like to give my dog treats for settling. So I'll teach my dog how to go to I use a little bath mat from IKEA with the little comfy ones. Yep. And I teach my dog to go over there and lie down and then to settle and relax. So there's a number of ways that you can do that. But I do use treats, and I also tend to use chews too. So long lasting or filled like frozen food toys that you can buy for them as well, so that they have something to do. And then the idea is you slowly wean them off having to have that little project in front of them that they can do. So in the beginning, you put them over there, you give them their chew, they're chewing away, and then you have little gaps of time where they don't have anything to work on, but they're staying on their mat or in their crate. And then when it comes to being in the crate, I tend to not use food. Most dogs won't eat when they travel anyway. And sometimes it can actually mask how stressed your dog is. So if I'm not going to be right there able to watch them, I want to make sure that if I'm leaving them alone unsupervised, in the beginning I'm going to have a little camera on them so I can see. If your dog's chewing away and they're eating away, a lot of the time they won't appear stressed until the food is finished. And then when the food is finished, they will get very stressed because suddenly there's nothing to distract them. So we want to make sure that there's no food. We're nearby if we need to come in and intervene, and we're just stepping up the goal very slightly. So we're not going to leave them 4 hours in one go. We might start with a shorter period, and we're going to be watching for any minor signs of stress without the food first.
All right. Linda's on the line for Vancouver, and Sarah, I think Linda could use your help. What's up, Linda?
Hi, yes, I have a 12-year-old dog, and he has always been, since we got him, very anxious when he's been in the car. He's always shivering and panting, and we have to make frequent stops in order to give him water because he tends to dehydrate himself. I've tried little sort of lavender oil at the back of his neck to decrease his anxiety, but it sort of works, but I'm wondering if you could give me any more tips on how to decrease his anxiety when we go on the road trips.
Well, Linda, you're already doing a really great job of taking breaks for him. I love that you're doing that for him. When dogs experience anxiety for a long period of time, they can start to feel really helpless about it. So by taking breaks, by making sure he's comfortable, giving him water to drink, you're already well on the right track to doing all the right things. One thing that I always like to rule out before I start looking at training for anxiety is actually motion sickness. Dogs get motion sickness the way that we get motion sickness, and it's really impossible to train your dog not to feel motion sickness. So the first thing to rule out is whether that is in fact what's going on. So the vet would be the one to talk to. What they will prescribe is a motion sickness medication to help alleviate some of those symptoms. And then you'll do a couple of test rides with that medication to see if the anxiety is the same or better. And if it's better, then that suggests that there's some motion sickness going on. If it's not better, that suggests that it's mostly anxiety, and sometimes it's both. Now, the other thing that I really strongly recommend, especially if it is anxiety, is actually just sitting in your car with a book without driving anywhere. So that'll tell you if it's anxiety. You'll see all the same symptoms, but it'll be a lot more comfortable for your dog because there's no noise or movement in that point. We're just settling, we're getting used to it. Whereas if it's motion sickness, it'll go away entirely. So you'll know, oh, when we're not moving the car, he's fine. And if it's motion sickness, because you can't train away symptoms like that, you know, if you were feeling ill and I went, I'll give you a cookie if you don't feel ill anymore, it doesn't work.
Last thing I want, mommy. Yeah.
Exactly. So it really helps to rule out that that chance of it being motion sickness first. So that's where I would start and then take it from there.
Is that helpful, Linda?
One just quick adjunct. Is it possible to use Gravol on a dog?
Ooh, that would be a question for a vet. So Gravol, I know Gravol helps me when I'm feeling motion sickness, but certainly I know there's a specific one, and I can't remember the name for it, but there's a specific one that you do get for dogs, and I don't know what's different about it with Gravol, and I wouldn't want to guess. Dosage as well is important. Remember, we're much bigger than our dogs, so when we're using human medications, we can really mess it up. So I don't recommend. I don't recommend trialing anything unless your vet says it's okay first.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Linda. Thanks for calling and all the best. Barbara is joining us from Hickson. Barbara, what's your situation?
Hi. Well, we're traveling with a kitten today. And our kitten just got neutered, and so this is the second time he's been third time he's been in the car. One time coming home, and then one time to the vet to get the shots, and now this time he is very much happier to be in our hands when he's traveling. And our dogs, they love to be exercised before they go because they get so excited about going camping and meeting their dog friends that they get like almost too energized. So we figured make them tired a little bit, take them for a good long walk before we go, and they tend to be good. So.
All right. Those are some good tips. All the best with the kitten in Quesnel. Barbara, thanks very much. I want to jump to an email question for you, Sarah. Sandy writes, our dog used to be a great road trip buddy. Now 14, though, with arthritis, quite unsteady on her feet, so we find she doesn't like to go in the car anymore. We try to minimize our car trips with her, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Any tips for making her less anxious, more comfy?
Yeah, for sure. So when dogs get older, things do change. And just like humans, the tasks that we used to do and used to be okay with sometimes become more difficult. So making sure that you have the most comfortable setup in your car, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's a crate with a nice cozy bedding. Maybe it's getting rid of the crate or getting a bigger space and making it really cozy, comfy. That can help in case she's just not comfortable in there. But on top of that, really taking breaks is the main big thing. Give yourself plenty of time. Drive nice and slowly, and when you're going around corners,
keep it smooth.
Keep it smooth. I have to do that for one of my dogs because he gets car sick. So keep it smooth. Take lots of breaks. And then the other thing about car journeys is sometimes with older dogs they can't hop into the car in the same way.
Yes.
So I always do recommend when they are a little bit older, getting yourself one of those car ramps, or teaching them to be comfortable with being picked up and lifted into the car, because sometimes they'll kind of put on a brave face for us and they think they can still jump in, but they can't. So it is good to kind of avoid any unnecessary kind of pains and aches and stuff from jumping in.
Got it. We have another call. Susan is on the line from Nanaimo. What's your situation, Susan?
Well, I have a 14-year-old Chihuahua, and I want to go someplace, road trip, and I don't know what people do when they travel solo and they say, I'm in Nanaimo, I want to go to Victoria for the day. I need to go in the store and buy some groceries. What do you do with your dog? You don't leave her in the car. I've actually gone into Walmart, even here in Nanaimo, with her in her little soft-sided kennel over my shoulder. Looks like a big purse. She's only 4 pounds. And I've been asked by the staff to get out of the store. I go, but she's not on the floor. Like, it doesn't matter. She's not, whatever. But what does somebody do? A hotel, I understand, gas station bathroom, you can just sneak them in yourself. You're carrying her. But like grocery stores, or you go into a restaurant, like, what do people do?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, well, ultimately, people really struggle. So, Susan, you're not alone with the struggle, but unfortunately, it is just really difficult to be a solo traveler with your dog with you. So, typically, when I travel, I try and bring a friend along, a human friend, and often I will carpool with someone who has also got a pet. So, if you want to do a long journey, you might look at the local Facebook group or something and be like, hey, I'm going down. And even if you're traveling in separate cars, when you make a stop off, someone can look after the dogs and you can kind of co-parent a little bit if someone's making a similar journey. I'm fortunate in that my partner usually travels with me, so I'm usually the one looking after the dogs when someone goes into the shop.
Well, somebody's going to be in charge. We're going to forgive the introduction, the interruption. We're going to get to Shelley. If you can keep it quick, and Lady Smith will squeeze one more call in. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much for taking my call. I just wanted to support the idea of crate training your dog and crate training well before a trip. It takes a time to crate train, but also the type of crate that you use in your vehicle. If you think about using your seatbelt and your airbag, you need to think about your dog becoming a projectile in the event of an accident. And there are a few crates on the market that are crash tested by an independent laboratory, because your wire crate, your soft crate, is not going to protect your dog in the event of a catastrophic accident. And you really want to make sure that you have the proper crate for traveling in your vehicle.
Shelley, appreciate your call from Lady Smith, and I see Sarah nodding along. Good advice there.
Absolutely, really important thing to be aware of is crash-tested crates.
All right. Sarah Shapiro-Ward, a professional dog trainer with Houndsfly. We appreciate your advice, and thank you to everybody who called and emailed in. Apologies if we couldn't get to all of you, and we really appreciate you weighing in.
Thanks for having me. It's
You're
been
welcome.
great.
That is it for our show today and this week. Thank you for calling in and joining the discussion and emailing. You can always email us bctoday@cbc.ca. You know what? I can fit it in. And we have time for one more email on traveling with pets. Zeba writes, I have a white cat that likes walking like dogs and doing his business outside. He was about 2 years old when we adopted him. We've traveled with him on 6-hour car trips and had to stop a couple of times for bathroom breaks and for walk and fresh air. He likes looking out the window of the car, does not like camping at all. We can walk with him without a leash. He likes running and jumping on trees. We used to walk with a leash, but he had to give up on that. There we are. We appreciate everyone's calls, regardless of the pets that you have. And thanks for all the advice.